Welcome to TheEatingCast. I am Chris.
And I'm Vincent, and today we're joined by David O'Donnell from Extinction Rebellion. Welcome.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for clearing out a part of your schedule and kind of making some time, setting aside some time to come on and talk with us.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So, David, just a quick kind of rundown. Oh, and before actually that, I always forget this. It's a bad habit. I always forget, but. To our viewers and our listeners, unfortunately today, because of the time constraint at the time that we're actually filming or recording this, we don't necessarily have food by any means, but Vincent does have some food, and we got coffee.
As usual. With bamboo straws.
Bamboo straws. Very important. All right. So, David, kind of give us a quick rundown of who you are, what do you do, kind of where your passions lie, and I guess what the future holds for you.
Okay.
Those are some deep questions.
Yeah, those are some big questions.
Yeah.
So I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion Chicago. We're a nonviolent direct action group, active in about 60 countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
Doing civil disobedience to catalyze rapid and large-scale climate action to address climate change. So I've been active in, I spend a lot of time, it's a volunteer position.
Okay.
I'm just a member of the group. I do other things for a living. But I've been a member of Extinction Rebellion not that long, about 6 months, but I've been committed to environmental action, environmental issues for quite a long time. I was a deputy commissioner at the City of Chicago's Department of Environment.
Oh, wow.
And worked there and in the mayor's office and then at the Department of Environment under Mayor Daley and helped draft the city's climate action plan. And I've always been interested in climate change and environmental issues, and I was working as a business consultant and was trying to get my company to think about sustainability at the time, and it wasn't really working. This was way back in the early 2000s. So I got an urban planning and public policy degree at UIC.
Okay.
And then turned that into a position at the Department of Environment, the mayor's office in the Department of Environment. So I did that for about 7 years, and then I went back to consulting, and most of my work was in public health and social innovation.
Okay.
And then I took a break.
Yeah.
A traveling sabbatical. My wife is a professor at Northwestern, and she took a sabbatical. We took our daughter out of the 7th grade.
Oh, wow.
And homeschooled her and traveled around the world for about 8 months. And during that time, I did a lot of thinking. It's sort of like a mid-career break. I'm 49, so did a lot of thinking about like what I was doing with my life and what I wanted to be doing with my life, and I came to the conclusion that if I wasn't working on climate change, I wasn't really sure what I was doing on the planet. So when we got back from traveling, I've been looking for work in the energy transition from a fossil fueled economy to a sustainable one.
Okay.
And I haven't quite found work there yet, but I did find Extinction Rebellion. So I'm a self-employed consultant and then working for Extinction Rebellion.
And Extinction started in 2018, right? Around there? And
around then.
Was in the UK, you said?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Extinction Rebellion got its start in Britain and in London. A group of activists and scientists who had been working on environmental issues for some time and were frustrated by the lack of action in the face of what the science was saying we needed to do. Started Extinction Rebellion, and that's how I heard about them in the spring of 2018. Is that right? I think. They shut down central London.
Oh, wow.
They occupied a series of bridges on the Thames around Parliament, where the building of the UK government is. They sat in the streets. They had the huge, big, pink boat, like a sailboat that they chained themselves to, that was painted pink and said, "Tell the truth" on the side.
Wow. Jeez.
And
that's pretty out there.
Yeah.
That's pretty out there.
Yeah, and that's part of the idea of direct action, is that you protests and marches, which I think are super important, and I've participated in many of them over the years, are really a request of people in power to do something.
Yeah.
And they're also really good for activists and people in a community to get together and feel like they're part of something larger. You go to a protest, you feel empowered. But they're really asking the government or a company you're protesting or whatever to do something. Direct action's theory of change is that you reach out to the levers of power and actually touch them. You actually stop things. You shut a building down. If there's trains you want to stop, you go on the tracks. And this is what's happening right now in Canada with some indigenous tribes around climate change. They've just essentially shut down the entire Canadian rail system by...
Is this why Blue Line's always delayed?
That makes so much sense now.
So the basic idea is to go do that. So they shut down central London for 8 days.
Wow.
And eventually got the UK government to declare a climate emergency, which is our first demand. And since then have done a whole series of other actions and continue to do that work. So I saw Extinction Rebellion doing that, and I was like,
"That's what I want."
Click.
Yeah.
Is there a chapter in Chicago? And there was, and so I got involved.
Nice.
That is so crazy.
So then, I guess what exactly right now is the problem with climate change? Because I know some people don't believe that it's a thing either.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that don't think climate change is a thing. I mean, if you go outside right now, it's like, if you just compare this time like last year, right? It's kind of like a milder winter right now.
Yeah.
But last year around this time, it was like we had like that polar vortex, and it was like negative 20, negative 30.
Yeah. The fluctuation is not normal.
Yeah, this kind of fluctuation is not normal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, a couple things there. One, it's important not to associate any given weather event with climate change, because it's kind of like the stock market, right? Like if you say the stock market has trended up over the course of the last year, or your stock you own is doing well, any given hour over the course of 6 months, any given hour or day, that stock might be down 2 points or up a half a point or down a quarter a point, right? So there's fluctuations, but the trend line over time is that the stock is doing better.
Picture, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely true of global average temperatures. They are, 9 of the hottest years on record have happened within the last 12 years.
My goodness.
So that means like 2 years within that time were not particularly hot, or as hot, right? But the general, the significant trend is toward warming the planet. So that it's a big question. I mean, if you want me to talk about just like the basics of climate change, I could do that first. But then your question was like, what's the problem with it? Or
I guess let's start with the basics. So
the basics are that the planet has developed over the course of whatever billions of years to maintain our life. Based around a certain kind of temperature. And there have been significant fluctuations over the course of that time in terms of what that temperature is. Ice ages, significant heating, and those massive changes in temperature have resulted in mass extinction events. There have been 5 of them over the course of the life of the Earth, and one of them that most people know about is when the dinosaurs went extinct, right? Mm-hmm. So, which was the result of massive ash in the atmosphere that significantly cooled the Earth and killed off most life on the planet. Mm-hmm. We are currently in the 6th mass extinction. We're at the beginning of the 6th mass extinction as a result of man-made climate change. Mm-hmm. So the planet has developed the capacity to take in solar radiation and the heat from that, right? So it lands on the Earth and it warms up the Earth. Mm-hmm. It hits the oceans, mm-hmm. and it warms up the oceans, or the oceans absorb it. But then a significant amount of that radiation actually radiates back into the Earth. I mean, back into the
atmosphere.
Yeah. Past the atmosphere, actually, okay. Off the Earth. So it reflects off the snow. Okay. It reflects off the roofs of mm-hmm. white roofs or whatever. So it bounces back into space, and the heat associated with that light, mm-hmm. goes back into space. Mm. Greenhouse gases, the most common one we talk about is carbon dioxide. Mm-hmm. Others are methane and other greenhouse gases. Essentially create a blanket around the Earth that keeps that excess solar radiation from going back into space. Mm-hmm. So it creates a greenhouse effect, mm-hmm. effectively. And then that, in turn, reduces the capacity of the Earth to absorb more heat, right? Because it stays hotter.
Okay.
It's not releasing the heat, so the oceans get less and less capable of absorbing new energy that's coming in. Okay. And so then eventually the planet begins to warm. And that's what's happening now. The sort of stasis that's created by plants absorbing carbon dioxide and creating oxygen and whatever has been significantly impacted by the amount of our emissions, carbon dioxide mm-hmm. emissions from our industrial processes, from our transportation systems, etc.
And I can only imagine it definitely got affected even more with the major fire that happened in the Amazon as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where you start to get into pretty scary levels of what we call feedback loops, right? So the Amazon, for example, is drier because the Earth is warmer, so it's more likely to catch fire. It catches fire. The emissions from that fire go into the Earth, into the atmosphere, and that reduces things. The same is true of the sea ice at the north and southern poles, right? So they reflect a significant amount of solar energy because they're white. Mm-hmm. But as they melt, or as they form, as the sea ice gets smaller every year, because it's the oceans are warmer, there's less reflecting, so more heat gets absorbed. So that's where we start to get into scarier scenarios where you create these sort of runaway feedback loops that will significantly increase warming while simultaneously reducing the planet's capacity to mitigate or affect that warming.
Mm-hmm. So just the rebound effect of the Earth is definitely kind of diminishing.
Yeah, it's
in terms of its capacity to take in all this potential carbon dioxide and what's the other one? Methane.
Yeah.
So in order to recycle that, it's less efficient now than it was before.
Yes, it's less resilient. Yeah. It's less able to respond to increases in temperature. So the way the scientists measure at the IPC, the International Panel on Climate Change, which really is I think the most important and most effective science being done on the planet right now. It's an amazing group of people.
You said IPC?
Yeah, the International Panel on Climate Change. Gotcha. So it's run by the UN, scientists from every country in the world, comparing data, writing papers, whatever, doing research in the Amazon, doing research in Siberia, doing research in oceans, etc., and bringing all that science together to begin to say, like, okay, what is the capacity of the Earth to deal with this anthropogenic emissions, meaning human-made, man-made emissions?
Yeah.
What are the possible scenarios for continued warming or for reducing warming, and what are the different paths we could take to catastrophic runaway climate change or keeping our temperatures below a certain level? So they say that one measure that they use is how many parts per million in the atmosphere of greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide do we have. And in order to keep the global average temperature below 1 degree of warming, the goal was to have it at 350 parts per million, which is higher than that sort of pre-industrial levels, but is a manageable amount. The Earth could stay at, roughly speaking, the same kind of food production, whatever. Weather events, etc., would stay stable if we kept it at 350 parts per million. It's currently at 416 parts per million, which is much higher than it should be.
So what would it require for us to kind of bring it down to that 300 mark?
350.
Oh, yeah, the 350 mark.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I try to keep this super simple because people...
Perfect.
People can get simple. Really... Yeah, I think people can get... I mean, simple but not easy.
Dang it.
Right?
Okay.
But, okay,
Gotcha.
So what we would need to do is 5 main things. One, we need to get to 100% renewable energy, or as close as possible, as quickly as possible. So that's wind, solar, geothermal, etc., different types of renewable energy. 2, so that's the energy we're producing.
Yeah.
2, we need to electrify everything. So that means our transportation systems.
Oh, yeah.
Cars is the place where we'll begin that work. Cars, trucks, and then harder things like construction equipment, bulldozers, this kind of stuff, and airplanes, and like that's kind of farther out, deep carbonization. But we need to do that. But we also need to be electrifying our building supply. So the heat in this building right now is natural gas. All the technology exists to make the heating in this building electric. So heating this building with electric power that is renewable. Then we need to fix our food. That means eating significantly less meat.
Oh no. As I'm eating this.
Significantly less meat.
Okay.
And then making sure that the agricultural processes that we use to produce our food are storing rather than releasing carbon. Okay, and we can talk about how to do that, and then reducing food waste. Because if you throw that quarter of that sandwich out, goes into a landfill and it produces methane.
So you better finish that sandwich.
It might produce methane in another form.
Once
it's in your stomach.
That's true.
But
how do you fix that?
Well, you can fix that, actually. I mean, a significant source of methane, one of the reasons that meat is such a huge source of climate greenhouse gases is animal farts. From cows and sheep and et cetera. And there are ways to fix that. Pigs, yeah. Anyway, so fix our food. and then use proven technologies to draw the existing emissions out of the air. Mm-hmm. And we have there's a lot of research and development being done on carbon sequestration, as it's called, which means pulling carbon out of the air.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But we have one proven technology.
What is that?
Trees.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So
I knew it.
Planting lots
Yeah,
and
yeah.
lots and lots and lots and lots and like trillions of trees, and doing things to keep trees from being cut down or burned, etc.
There was also a kind of something I can't remember where it originated, but there was something about like it was going online and everything like that. It was like about help plant like I think 1 billion trees or something like
trillion.
that. A trillion trees. Yes.
Yeah, Davos this year.
Yeah.
Which is the meeting of the rich, wealthy, and smart people of the world, whatever.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll ever make it to that.
Yeah, maybe. Will we ever get to Davos? I haven't been invited
Guess
yet.
we can't plant trees if you're not
Hey,
Davos.
Davos. Yeah, definitely would love to have a seat or even like like just a peek through the window.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
Yeah.
At Davos, they were talking a lot about trees and planting trees, which is important, but we also need to be drawing down our emissions.
Yeah.
So the thing, and what the IPC says is that we need to get to a net zero emissions economy, which means we are drastically reducing our emissions and counteracting the emissions we still do have with trees or other kind of drawdown technology.
Yeah.
So net zero, even though we're emitting some, we're counterbalancing that with, so net we have zero emissions by 2050. Okay, so that's changing the entire global economy, our transportation systems, our building stock, our food systems, etc. by 2050. And we need to be at half that by 2030, which is, or at least on the path to half that by 2030, which is very, very soon.
If I'm not mistaken, I think a good way forward for that, actually, I think, I could be wrong, but I feel like this did happen, or I just could have completely dreamt it. But didn't Elon Musk recently release his patents for all the?
He did.
Okay, so he did.
Yeah.
So he released all of his patents. All right. So
here's
as a way forward, right? Kind of like now, at least like for the automotive industry, right? Now that he released those patents, they're free to the public and they're free to pretty much these industries, right?
Yeah.
They can now start using that technology and converting it or getting cars off the street that are creating this carbon footprint and kind of having them now all electric.
Yeah.
There's no excuse?
Yeah, there's really no excuse now.
Yeah, there is no excuse. And that's what's so exciting. Like, so that's true. Elon was frustrated that the auto industry wasn't following Tesla's lead, so he just released his patents and made them fully available. And Daimler Chrysler, like a month ago, just committed to no further R&D for the internal combustion engine. Yeah. Toyota has done the same. Ford is close, right? Like, so the major auto industries are saying, like, electric vehicles are the future. There are huge commitments in China and elsewhere to electrify buses, like commuter buses. There is no place in the world where renewable energy isn't cheaper than coal. Except for maybe if you build a power plant right next to a coal mine in India, where you don't have to transport the coal. So they are producing electricity with wind power now. That is like coming in at 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
So what speaking about like the wind power, at least, I'm sorry to cut you off there, by the way.
Can I just finish my point?
Yeah.
So the point is that we have the technology. And the question is how quickly. So that the transition is happening.
Yeah.
The momentum has shifted. It used to be when I was at the Department of Environment that everybody was like, well, solar, renewable energy will never work because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
It's now cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Renewable energy will never work because it relies on tax credits and incentives from the government.
Yeah.
Those are now gone,
Mm-hmm.
and it's still cheaper. Renewable energy will never work because it's intermittent and you can't get power when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. We now have utility scale batteries that are being deployed in California and Australia, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Tesla's working on those too.
Oh,
Nice.
that's awesome.
And so the question isn't whether or not it will happen. The question is how quickly will it happen, and who is going to stand in the way of it happening?
Mm-hmm.
Because the fossil fuel companies, there stands to be many, many, many more winners from that energy transition, right? Anytime a new industry comes in, all kinds of new jobs get created.
Yeah.
All kinds of new opportunities get opened up.
Mm-hmm.
Startup companies can get in because the field's wide open,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with old industries and old technologies, there's incumbent companies that fight to keep people in. Innovation gets stagnant. Things don't change. Not a lot of jobs are created.
Right.
But those old industries, they've got 30-year loans
Yeah.
on a coal plant that they've invested their money in. And that coal plant needs to stop working like today.
Right.
But they don't, the banks that are funded the loans for that and the companies that are running those don't want those coal plants to shut. So they're going to be losers. Some people, some companies. And so the question is, and those people those companies have an outsized influence on our governments and on our regulation.
Yeah.
So the question is, can we do things to, wrest control of our governments from these old, antiquated, polluting industries, and move towards a new, sustainable economy and future?
Yeah.
And that's where we think direct action, civil disobedience, can have an impact on those companies. Because, for example, the tribal indigenous First Nations activists in Canada right now that have shut down the rail system, they're effectively increasing the cost
Wait, who is
of transporting coal.
Yeah.
Right? And
So the tribal nations.
Oh, tribal nations.
That are in in Canada right now.
Yeah, so there's a pipeline project that's supposed to be going across, excuse my pronunciation, I think it's Wet'suwet'en, which is a First Nation tribe in Alberta, where the tar sands are. And they are saying, these lands are our lands. We don't want you running this dirty oil, which is essentially tar sands oil is like literally poison. Anyway, we don't want you running this dirty pipeline over our lands and potentially having a spill and poisoning our water. And so they drove Winnebagos and camps over different intersections for the rail system in order to shut down the fossil fuel infrastructure in Canada. So my point being, if I'm a banker and I'm looking at investing in, should I put my money, or should I put the bank's money, or should I put the pension fund money for the city of Chicago's employees into coal, into natural gas, or into wind power?
Yeah.
What we want to do is direct action so that when they see that, they say oh, but if I put it in coal, there's probably going to be a bunch of activists that are going to slow the process down of getting that permit happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to, every time we try to run our coal trains through town, they get shut down or whatever. So that is also going to cost. But if I put it in wind,
We got nothing to worry about.
I got nothing to worry about. So that's the idea behind direct action.
Yeah.
And it's also like basic economics.
Very basic. Yeah.
Right? Just think about it. The fossil fuels are by their very nature inflationary in terms of their cost.
Mm-hmm.
If you get like the easiest oil to get and you use it all up, you have to go deeper into the Arctic to get more oil. That costs more.
Mm-hmm.
If you use up all the coal in one place, you got to go to the harder places to get coal. You got to do, mountaintop removal in Tennessee and like take off the whole top of a mountain in order to get
Blow
coal.
some stuff off.
Yeah, right. It's more expensive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Wind, you put that in, the marginal cost for running that wind turbine into the future is zero. It costs nothing to continue to run. I mean, you got to maintain it and whatever. You got to repair it.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to go find
Wind.
more wind or more sun.
Right.
It's always going to be there.
Right.
So, this is one of the things that's so frustrating to me about Steve Mnuchin, our Treasury Secretary, talking smack to Greta when she was at Davos. Greta Thunberg, the activist,
Little
right?
girl, right?
Yeah, a little 12-year-old girl who started the youth climate strike movement, which is now numbering in the millions from around the world by just like, she was a middle schooler.
Yeah.
She was in class.
Uh-huh.
She learned about climate change. And she was like, okay, well, if that's going to happen, if the sixth mass extinction, if life on Earth is possibly threatened, why am I in school?
Right.
Or she's first asked, why aren't we doing anything about it? Why are our emissions continuing to rise, even though we've known since the 50s that this is happening? And then she thought, so if I potentially have no future, why am I in school? So then she went to the Swedish parliament, and every Friday she just skipped school and sat in front of the Swedish parliament with a sign that said, do something.
Mm-hmm.
And now she's talking to the UN. There's, millions of kids around the country who have joined her movement. And so she shows up at Davos and she gets interviewed. And Steve Mnuchin, our labor secretary for the U.S., he's an adult and she's a child. So, just don't be a jerk.
Right.
She's a child. Dude.
Yeah.
Okay, so he talks down to her. He's totally dismissive. And he says, well, when she takes an economics 101 course, maybe we should listen to what she's talking about. And it's like, dude, it is economics 101.
Yeah.
You take the economics, go back to your textbooks and reread them.
That is crazy.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I totally interrupted you.
Oh, no. I
What were you
interrupted
saying?
you.
15 minutes later.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's cool. But that was really interesting. I actually liked kind of like that talk and kind of where that was going.
Yeah.
But my initial thoughts were kind of like with the wind and everything. What's like the what's kind of like where are we at, right, in terms of, because I know back in the day solar power and wind turbines, they were a thing. They've been a thing since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Right. Solar power, it's been even before I was even born. Right.
Yeah.
I think in the 80s or something like that. So my question to that, right, is where are we at in terms of efficiency, right, of these solar panels as well as wind turbines, and potentially even I'm not sure what they would be called for the water. Is it just water hydro dam?
Yep.
What are the efficiency ratings of those now compared to before?
Yep.
And with the obviously efficiency is going to be constantly be increasing, right, as more and more hands are going into it and more breakthroughs are happening.
Yeah.
So my question is like, how fast is that going to progress, as well as kind of what potentially that can, like, where can that potentially lead to, right? In terms of like a newer energy source that we might be able to harness.
Yeah, those are great questions, and I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist. I'm not an economist. I'm an activist.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I will say, so I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I will say efficiency for solar panels have significantly increased. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, the cost to deploy them, which means the marketing you have to do, the time it takes you to get financing, the training workers to install solar panels, all of this, they've all come down significantly in terms of, and that's why the cost has dropped to 4, 5, 6 cents a kilowatt hour for solar power.
Wow, that is
like
insane.
Significantly. The other thing that happened was, a couple things happened. One, Germany significantly committed to solar power in the early 2000s.
Yep.
And China responded to that market for solar. So Germany is now somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% powered by solar power.
Wow.
Don't quote me on that number, but it's in that range.
It's growing.
It's grown significantly. Yeah. And they did that even though the costs were higher than coal. And they have super cheap coal in Germany. They have this like dirt that they burn. It's like the worst kind of coal. It's like not even like hard coal. It's just like...
It's like soot.
Yeah, and they burn. It's super inefficient, and they just like tear up forests. Anyway, they're stopping doing that. And the government just said, like, we're committing to solar power, even though it costs more. Mm-hmm. China saw that market and then just jumped on it to our... to the U.S.'s whatever. We lost out on that market because China jumped in, and they just, because China does that with their manufacturing, they just like reduce the costs for solar panels radically. Mm-hmm. I think the question of efficiency is a different question, but the production of them at their current efficiency rates, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% efficiency, which is actually better than fossil fuels, is going up too. But anyway, so the costs have come down significantly, and they'll continue to come down. Eventually, they'll have to stop going down, but they're coming down. But I just read a report, or actually, I didn't read the report. Because I'm not that much of an economics geek. I listened to an interview of a guy who did a report which is called the death toll for petrol. Mm-hmm. And he did an analysis of, is it more efficient to power our economy and in specific our cars using gasoline versus electric power generated by renewables? Mm-hmm. He took as his assumption that oil was at $60 a barrel, which it's essentially stayed at about $60 a barrel for the last 10 years, and found that it's significantly more efficient if his model was, if you had $1 billion to invest, which, like Shell Oil, like that's a very small investment for Shell Oil. If you had $1 billion to invest, should you invest it in the internal combustion engine and oil, or should you invest it in renewables and electric vehicles? And the marginal costs and the efficiency associated with renewables and electric vehicles outperforms coal significantly, or outperforms oil significantly.
Right. And all the reports and all these experiments and all these, things, they all point to renewable energy. They all point to electric, vehicles and electrify everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's just crazy that people are, like you said, they are still hung up on anti renewable energy just because like coal has jobs or like people will lose their jobs or the loans that you said, they have to live up to it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize like that's real.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like people losing their jobs if they've been in coal mining for generations or whatever, that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to take care of those people. We have to figure out a way to transition them into new markets, into new types of jobs. Mm-hmm. But coal companies are going bankrupt.
Right.
Like left and right. Like in the news every week, another coal company goes bankrupt. Mm-hmm. You think they're going to take care of their workers? No.
They're going to peace out.
Yeah. You think they're gonna keep their commitments to those pension funds? No. So you got to think about things like what Spain did recently. Spain has a small, like compared to the U.S., has a small coal industry. Mm-hmm. But that small coal industry, just like in the United States, represents a group of voters that are important. Mm-hmm. And so they had an outsized impact on the Spanish parliament's ability to work on the energy transition. Because they were like, don't get rid of coal because this group of voters, depends on them. Uh-huh. So the Spanish government just bought the coal industry. They just bought all their assets. They shut the mines down. They took over the pension funds for the coal miner workers, and they, are working to get them new jobs. And they just said, we're just going to remove this obstacle altogether,
right,
so that we can fully commit to wind power, because they have a huge wind industry in Spain.
That sounds so easy to do. Like we should.
Yeah, it costs a lot of money, but yes.
Oops, sorry, you're fine. But in terms of like its impact, that's actually a good way to go about it, right? Because now, instead of saying like screw the the coal industry and those select few individuals that still work for them and like kind of have their pensions kind of tossed aside, as now that coal company is like kind of going into bankruptcy. Yeah. They took the risk, right, and they bought the coal company knowing that it's going to dig them into a really big hole. Yeah. In hopes for so to speak, but kind of to dig them into, let's say like a small hole, right, a little like a little divot. Yeah. And they bought it over and took the pretty much the pensions, and they're now controlling the pensions. So those individuals that were working for the coal company won't lose their pensions. Yeah. Right. And are now trying to allocate resources to, I'm assuming, properly retrain them into more tech-based or just kind of like industry-based technologies in terms for kind of renewable energy. Yeah. And that's just really not crazy, but like it's a step in the right direction. I feel like a lot of countries could definitely use that as an example. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think, the question, right, is, so if you think about indoor plumbing, in 1920 in the United States, there were like 2% of the homes in the United States had indoor plumbing. They all had outhouses. By 1960, that number was like 95% of houses had indoor plumbing. Okay, so that's a 40-year major transition to our infrastructure, creating a whole new industry of plumbers, creating whole new technologies, toilets, all different kinds of toilets, cities, laying plumbing, sewers, just this massive transition from, going to the bathroom in outhouses to everybody having a toilet or more than one toilet in their house. Yeah. And so that's possible. It's just we don't have 40 years to do it. Right. For this transition. We got to do it like now. Right. And
that's also possible. So Pearl Harbor is bombed before the U.S. joins World War II. Within months, the auto industry was making tanks. Within months. They, shifted a ton of money and resources and et cetera to the auto industry. They nationalized. They just took over some industries and said, okay, your guys are no longer making nylons. Now you're making paratrooper parachutes, and we're just going to do that, right? They just made this massive pivot. And so it's possible, but we need the political will to do it. Yeah. We need to be thinking of this not as something that's like, oh yeah, it's good to save the environment. No, like we need to globally shift the whole economy.
There needs to be urgency. That's what it is. Yeah.
Which is why the first demand of Extinction Rebellion is tell the truth. Talk about this like for what it is. It's a crisis. It's an emergency. So we've been working here in Chicago. Our first demand, declare a climate emergency. We've done a series of actions, shutting down some streets and but we've also been working with many other people, other environmental organizations, behind the scenes with some of the aldermen.
Yeah.
On Monday, I testified at City Council. The Energy and Environment Committee in City Council introduced a resolution to declare a climate emergency. That's going to be at City Council on Wednesday. There are 50 aldermen. I think 48 of them have already signed on to it.
Oh, wow.
And so they'll declare a climate emergency.
So that's a pass.
Yeah. And they'll join like 80 cities big cities around the country. Nice. and states, some full states who have declared a climate emergency. So that's a first step. Now, at the hearing, everybody was essentially saying like, good on you, declaring climate emergency. Now act like there's an emergency. Right? Like that's one thing, a resolution, a non-binding resolution in City Council. But, I think we should pause and say like, cool, all right, they're actually talking about it like what it is. It's an emergency. And once you start doing that, and then, this is, I think the upcoming election is super important. I mean, we do have a president and an administration that is actually denying climate change, doesn't think it exists, in stark contrast to what the science clearly says. And every single one. So as an environmental activist, I was super frustrated in 2016 when they talked about climate change for like in the presidential debates, like all told for like maybe 10 minutes, like during the Democratic primaries and the debate. They just didn't talk about it.
Yeah. Pushed under the rug.
And now every single Democratic candidate has compared to what we're doing now, a major plan for addressing climate change. They range, right? Like Bernie's is massive, a Green New Deal that's like a huge investment. Elizabeth Warren's is pretty high. Amy Klobuchar's is less so, right? But at least they're all talking about it. So if I had one, if you guys want to talk about like messages for your listeners, like what can I do, etc.
Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts about that. But the first one is vote.
Yeah, I know.
Just vote. And vote for a candidate. Vote Democratic. Like, do not vote Republican, vote Democratic. Because regardless of who your candidate is, they're committed to climate change, at least in some way. And Bill McKibben, who's a famous environmental activist and runs 350.org, which is a great organization, he once said, people always ask me, what can I as an individual do? And my answer is always, stop thinking and acting like an individual. This is not an individual issue. This is a systemic, countrywide, economy-wide, big challenge. And so if you're going to vote, take 5 friends and vote
That's a
with
lot
them.
of people.
Just get 5 of your friends to vote.
Yeah.
And get them to take 5 of their friends. Everybody should be voting.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But I mean, I think that's an important, I think that the whole idea, like, okay, so we're sitting here, we're drinking with bamboo straws. Mm-hmm. That's important, right? But like, I wouldn't be surprised if some member of your audience mm-hmm. is looking at this and says like, well, those guys are using plastic. Mm-hmm. Well, how'd that guy, David, how did he get there today? Did he drive his car? Yeah, I drove my car. Right? Okay. Yeah. I personally, as a spiritual and ethical practice, I try to reduce my emissions. But it's kind of like saying to, let's say there's a small, farmer, not like a tenant, but like an actual farmer during the period of slavery in the South. And that farmer owns 2 slaves. Mm-hmm. And he knows ethically that that's whatever. He's Christian and he believes like I probably shouldn't own slaves. Mm-hmm. But the entire economy of the South, the entire culture of the South is committed to slavery. Mm-hmm. And he could, and it would have been a good thing for him to like free his slaves. Okay? Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't have affected slavery. The thing that affected slavery was the national government saying like, no, this is wrong. You can't do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And just like we're going to get with the energy transition, we're going to get resistance. There was resistance. And then there was a mass mobilization that resulted in a civil war. And the whole institution of slavery was changed because we treated it like a systemic problem, which is what it is. And the same is true of climate change. And I think that question, how did you drive here? Are you using plastic straws? Is actually a control strategy to keep us from taking action, mm-hmm. to undermine our will to act. Because we're like, oh, I feel shame. I shouldn't. Yeah. Of course you're using oil. Mm-hmm. You've got no other options. Mm-hmm. So go to the system operators. We got to change the system. Who are the system operators? The fossil fuel companies, the finance industry that finances those companies, mm-hmm. and the politicians and the governments that regulate those industries. Mm-hmm. That's who needs to change. Mm-hmm. We need to be looking for ways to affect them. And I would just say to your listeners, because it's a system-wide thing, you can't do it all yourself.
Yeah. Right. It's a team effort.
So it's a team effort, and just pick one.
Right.
Just pick one of the things I talked about. Renewable power.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't act as an individual. You have a condo board. Talk to your condo board about getting solar panels on your roof. You're a student. Go talk to the administration at your university and ask them what they're doing with renewable power. Find out what's happening in Chicago with renewable power, okay? And advocate for change in the city.
Just get
Find
involved.
out what's happening, statewide with the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and call the governor and tell the governor to pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Just pick one of them. Or pick composting, food waste. You can start composting your food, get a worm bin and get worms eating your food, or call somebody and pay a little extra every month to have your food waste taken away. Look at what the city's doing around composting. Not much. They could do a lot more, etc. And just pick one and work on it for a year. Whatever it is. Join an organization that's focused on one of those things. Yeah. Give money to an organization that's working on one of those things. Mm. Not everybody is going to be willing to do direct action like Extinction Rebellion's doing. Not everybody's going to be willing to risk arrest for this issue. And we don't need everybody to be risking arrest. We need some people to be doing that. And then we need a larger group of people And our belief is that if you see somebody who's like willing to risk arrest, you start to say, that must be important. Because that person is leaving their job in order to go shut down that train system or whatever. So maybe I should do what I can do, which is vote or, encourage my politicians to take action or blah, blah, blah. And so that's what happened with the Civil Rights Act, right? Like a small number of committed activists did sit-ins during Jim Crow South and said, we'll sit here, we'll do the bus boycott. Some people came down from the north and supported them, but it was a very small number of people. Mm-hmm. But the news footage of people being hit by fire hoses and attacked by dogs and got the entire whole country talking about it, which gave the political will for Johnson to pass the Civil Rights Act, which is a major piece of legislation that really changed the country. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, it's just it goes back to the same thing with Elon, releasing the patents. We have all these things we can pick. Yeah. Just pick one, get involved. Yeah. And like you said, don't think from an individual mindset. Right, because you're not the only one. Yeah. Right, and there's a lot of people out there, especially our age too, and in our generation, we all pretty much have a progressive mindset. So, just hop on.
Yeah, we do have a progressive mindset, but there's also what I think is like a big major issue with like our generation actually is, social media. Mm-hmm. Like it's I would actually say it's like an epidemic for us, just because. It's a platform where the viewers are only able to see the finished product, if you will. So the viewers can see, like, let's say you're an Instagram person, right? An influencer, or just kind of like you're just your average Joe that just likes to post pictures of let's say food, for example, right? Yeah. You see this amazing dish in front of you, right? And you're just kind of scrolling through like, oh, wow, that picture of that food looks amazing. Yeah. But what you don't see, right, is like that individual, like how he, like the steps and their actions that it took in order to get to that point where they were able to take that picture. Yeah. Right. Like
to cook the food.
Exactly. To cook the food, right? To kind of save enough. If it is like saving money, right? Saving money for the food. If it's at a high end restaurant, getting that reservation, or even just kind of like learning, right? If you're cooking on your own, right? Learning to actually how to properly cook the food. Right. Right. And just seeing the hard work that it takes to get there. Our generation is stuck with a mindset where it's like instant gratification. Yeah. That we want, and we kind of like have a distorted mindset where, oh, this is a problem, we want to fix it, but it has to happen now. Right. Not 10 years, not 20 years, now.
Right. Right.
We want to see the results now.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think about my daughter, right? Like she loves to watch those like time lapse Instagram posts of baking.
Yeah, and they're really cool.
Yeah,
right?
Like
but
super
it takes
fun.
time.
Yeah, and then she like goes, and I'm always like, well, do you want to bake?
And she's like, no, I just want that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but she does sometimes, and then she's like frustrated that like, oh, the cake didn't actually rise, and
the trial and error takes
time. You got to do it again. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And even like for instance, other like even bigger things, right? Like traveling. Let's take that one, right? Yeah. People don't see the logistics that go behind that, right? Yeah. Like, I gotta take time off work. I gotta work this amount of time. I gotta do this, and this in order to kind of like open up my schedule during this week or this month in order for me to take this trip. Yeah. Right. The cost that goes into it, trying to maybe learn another language if you're going to another country to then better communicate with them.
And then what do you think what's the outcome of that? Like
the outcome of that, I personally feel like it's just our generation is stuck in a kind of time frame where they only see the glamour. Yeah. They don't see the struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that.
That's the same with school too. Like people think as soon as they graduate, they deserve a job, right? A bunch of my friends who graduate, they feel that, and they disregard the fact that even after they got the degree, they still got to put in work. They got to go to internships. They need to volunteer.
Yeah.
They feel like, oh, this $60,000 salary should be yours.
Just like handed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is also a big challenge with climate change, which is that, generally speaking, depending on who you are and where you come from, we have year over year, generation over generation, improved our lives.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the children have a better life in the United States. I mean, it's not true if you're African American. It's not true in some places, etc. But in the U.S., let's say, generally speaking, right? Like you have immigrant parents, they work really hard. They didn't go to college. You go to college, you get out, you get a better job. And we've had this economy that has worked, and we haven't recognized that what it's doing is pulling from the earth in order to make all of that possible. And now the earth is essentially reaching its limit, its capacities for supporting all that convenience and all that growth, etc. So we're going to be expecting, in the future, things will be better. No, actually, in the future, things are going to be worse. You're not going to be able to live in Florida. Florida's going to be gone.
It's going to be gone.
Lower Manhattan's going to be gone. These things are so we need to be talking to people and saying like, all right, A, what can we do about it? And there's a lot we can do about it. Okay. But and B, how can we be more resilient? How can we be more creative? How can we imagine different ways of living on the planet? How can we imagine different ways of taking care of each other? And I think there's two narratives that are happening right now. One is the story of business as usual. We're just going to keep going as we've always done. The economy will keep growing. Our natural resources are infinite. We'll continue to pull from them. Economic growth, regardless of the costs. That story is slipping into what I call the great unraveling, which is, okay, we can talk about climate change, right? Like increased fires, increased floods. But the thing that's more important about that is how people respond to catastrophe. So Indonesia starts going underwater while simultaneously the glaciers in Nepal melt, and so India begins to have significant droughts, and they start to, there's huge mass migrations from Indonesia into India. What happens then? Well, fascists and autocrats start, when a country's under threat, take over, they start wars, etc. Right? Like, how are the people going to respond to this when Floridians start coming to Chicago? Like, are we going to build affordable housing? Are we going to kick all the poor people out of Chicago? Like, what are we going to do? Right? So that's one narrative. The other narrative is that in response to this global threat, because humans have two reactions to threat. One, we tribalize, we close down, we shut our borders, we fight each other. But what else happens when when catastrophes happen? You see this huge outpouring of love, of money, of support. You see people just getting in a bus or a plane and going down to Haiti and trying to be helpful, right? So maybe in response to this global catastrophe, we start to turn towards each other and we start to help each other and we start to come together as a like we did to fight Nazism and fascism in Europe, or in all these other forms, right? And people come together and we begin to shift the economy to a renewable, sustainable, just one. We take the opportunity to say let's not only have renewable power, but let's have living wages for people.
Yeah.
Let's center the needs of the communities, the people of color who've been out, disproportionately impacted by pollution. Let's ensure that they are at the center of this work, and we become more resilient, more capable, etc. And that's the story I'm committed to.
Yeah.
And I think there's a chance that story could be the one we write. But we have to start acting now.
Yeah.
That's true.
It can go either way.
Yeah.
It can go left, right, up, down.
Yeah.
Forward, back.
Yeah.
Another
quick thing I want to say about social media, and I don't know if your friends are political, but my friends are super political. We talk about politics all the time. And I think social media gives my friends a false sense of accomplishment. So they think that if they spend time on Facebook writing a really well-worded post about why they think Trump should be impeached, that they're actually doing something.
Yeah.
And they aren't doing anything.
Yeah. It's like
they're just talking, and it sort of like lets off some steam.
Yeah.
And they, but essentially what they're doing is, talking to their friends, not convincing anybody else, and essentially funding Facebook's marketers and its advertising revenue. When what they really need to be doing is like getting involved with a particular candidate and going knocking door to door, registering voters, or doing that work. But they've expended all their political energy by like chattering on Facebook.
Yeah.
So I have something to say to that. So just in regards to that, like same thing with mental health. I used to be the one that always wrote about depression, anxiety, and then I realized.
You did spoken word, right?
Yeah, and but before that or after that, I realized that when I write these Instagram posts or I write these Facebook posts, I'm just getting that gratification from the likes, the responses, the comments. Yeah. But then after a while, I realized, okay, I'm not really doing anything. In my head, I thought I was spreading message. I thought I was, sharing my story. People would be listening. But then I realized I need to actually take action, like you said. I need to create a platform like this, and actively talk about it, actively meet people and direct action, like you said.
Yeah.
So I think same thing with my friends who are political. They do that too, where they just write something just to get an instant a reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, the other thing is it feels so good.
But here's the thing too.
To be acting, to be doing something. Because whether or not you know it, you're grieving climate change. You're afraid. Everybody in the world knows this is happening, even the ones who are denying it. And in our bodies, we know the truth of it. And we're not letting ourselves feel those feelings and connect. And so we're just like, I'm just not going to deal with it. It's too much. I don't want it. It's too complicated. I don't really think it's true or whatever, We're running away to distraction.
We're turning a blind eye.
Yeah, and if you turn your attention to it and just actually feel it, and then you go out and you find people. So that's why when I went to my first Extinction Rebellion meeting, and people say this to me every time they come to their first Extinction Rebellion meeting, they're like, oh my God, this feels so good to be in the room with people who recognize that we're on a burning freaking train going over a freaking cliff. Nobody else is talking about it. Yeah. And so then you find the people who you feel like the only sane person in the asylum. And then you find in the corner of Arkham Asylum in the cafeteria, you find some other sane people and you're like, thank God, let's break out of this place. Yeah. And you start taking action and it feels so good.
Yeah.
That just made me think of on that burning train, someone's like, close the blinds.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, I'm just thinking
waiter, another beer, please.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm seeing when you said that, actually, I was thinking of off the top of my head, I was like, you're on a canoe boat, right? And you're just kind of canoeing, and then you see you're nearing the edge of this waterfall. You're like, okay, never mind. I'm gonna turn around, just continue paddling as you're kind of nearing closer to the edge. You're gonna fall off because you think you can paddle away from it.
Right.
That's not gonna happen.
You turn your back to the waterfall and start paddling
exactly.
the other direction.
Maybe it's not there.
It's not there.
Yeah, or
things.
it's more like you just like you see the waterfall, you turn your back to it, you lie down in the canoe, and you start scrolling through Instagram. Well,
your last post, get a couple likes.
Oh my god, that's ridiculous.
All right, well, so we're gonna wrap up.
All right, cool.
Let's. What last bit of advice would you like to give our listeners?
Yeah, so just vote.
Got it.
Get ready to vote. Just start paying attention a little bit. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're registered and vote. And get other people to vote. Just like 5 friends or whatever. That's one thing. 2, find a movement. And you guys have probably a younger listening audience. Join the Sunrise Movement. The Sunrise Movement is a group of young people who are committed to passing the Green New Deal. They are awesome. Mm-hmm. We co-organize with them here in Chicago. We love working with them, and they're youth-led, and they're amazing. So either give some money or join or whatever. There's a Chicago chapter that's super active, etc. And they're active all over the country. Extinction Rebellion. We go to Extinction Rebellion Chicago on Facebook. We do talks. I give a talk regularly. We do nonviolent civil disobedience training once a month. The next one is March 8th. And come and learn. Like, if you want to come join us and like come into the streets and shut some shit down, like nonviolent direct action, we do that training once a month, or just come to one of our meetings. Mm-hmm. The next action that we're doing, are you guys familiar with the Dakota Access Pipeline?
Not so
I have not heard of that in a while.
So Standing Rock was the indigenous Native American tribes who stood up to a pipeline that was going across their land, and they lost that fight when Trump came into power, and the pipeline was built. But a lot of people in Chicago don't know that pipeline ends in central Illinois.
Wow.
Where all that dirty tar sands oil gets turned. It either gets shipped down to Texas, or down to New Orleans, or to the Gulf, or gets refined there into gasoline. They are currently, Energy Transfer Partners, who runs that pipeline, is asking the Illinois Commerce Commission to double its capacity, which is like kind of a death warrant for the globe if that happens.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So they're having a hearing on that March 7th, and we're gonna be there. And if anybody wants to join us and be part of doing what we can to stop that from happening, that's something that's happening in the very near term. Mm-hmm. Okay, so those are like activist organizations. Maybe you don't want to be an activist. Maybe you're really busy. Maybe you've never done any activism before. Whatever. I would do the thing I said. Just pick a thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, food waste, whatever.
Pick one, yep.
And just pick one. And think about, what can I do in my personal life? Don't get stuck there. But what can I do in my personal life? What can I do with the job, my company, my university, my whatever, my city, my state? And just learn about it. And again, with a group of friends, just commit to doing something on that topic for a calendar year.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it just feels so good to be taking some kind of action.
And you're saving the planet.
Yeah.
And then, well, thank you for that.
Sure.
Love that. Where can we find, if you have any social media, or Extinction Rebellion?
Yeah, we're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. Extinction Rebellion Chicago is the Facebook handle. Our Instagram handle, just search Extinction Rebellion Chicago. I can't remember exactly what the handle is, but we're there. We have a website too. But also, it's important to remember that Extinction Rebellion is international. So you look for Extinction Rebellion International, and the website there is super fun. Like they just send out a weekly newsletter.
Oh wow!
And it's so cool. Like you're like, all right, there's these activists in Berlin. There's these activists doing this thing in UK. Here's what's happening in Perth, Australia. Here's a small school in Nigeria that did a youth climate strike. And you get this you feel like, whoa, stuff's happening. Like
You're
not alone. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
So and that's very motivating just
That
to
is very
be plugged
motivating,
into
actually.
that. So that would be what I would recommend.
Awesome.
So again, David, we just want to thank you for your lovely words and just kind of like educating us and our viewers as well as our listeners a little bit more on kind of like the whole issue with climate and the change that needs to happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's really informative, and I'm not going to be. Oh, we'll see. But like, definitely making me think about like my choices now a little bit more in terms of like what I'm using and kind of my own food waste, because I do eat a lot of meat, a lot of beef, chicken, fish. So I might dwindle down that a little bit, but we'll see. All right.
Thanks for the coffee.
Yeah,
it's really good to spend time with you guys.
Yes, it was awesome. And
yep.
You may take the wheel.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to leave a review and rating on our Apple Podcast, all things The Eating Cast, especially on Instagram or Facebook. If you guys enjoy these kind of conversations with our guests, learning, eye-opening topics, just hit us up. And once again, thank you for tuning in.
Awesome. And again, we will catch you guys on the next one. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.